In the sun-scorched town of Redemption Creek, three notorious outlaws made the fatal mistake that would end their reign of terror. They couldn't have known that the solitary bartender meticulously cleaning his glassware had more notches on his gun than the Blackwater gang had robberies to their name, or that their cruel mockery would resurrect a ghost the territory thought long buried, the infamous Phantom Rider. A man so feared that even now, 8 years after his disappearance, U.S. Marshals still whisper his name around campfires. With equal parts awe and dread, the dying light of a blood-orange sunset filtered through the dust-caked windows of the Crossroads Saloon, casting long shadows across the weathered floorboards. Whiskey glasses gleamed like treasure in the amber glow as they passed from worn leather case to polished shelf. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ezra Stone worked with the methodical precision of a watchmaker, each movement economical and deliberate, like everything else about the man. 8 years behind a bar had taught him patience, that and things far darker, lessons paid for in blood long before he ever poured his first shot of rye. A battered piano sat silent in the corner of the saloon, its player gone home for the evening. The wall-mounted kerosene lamps flickered, their dancing flames throwing spectral shapes against the walls as a lone ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, stirring the hot, heavy air, but doing little to dispel it. The territorial newspaper lay open on the bar, headline announcing another stage robbery out by Desolation Pass. Ezra's eyes flicked toward it momentarily before returning to his work. The small mirror behind the bar reflected more than just bottles of whiskey and bourbon. Positioned carefully, it gave Ezra a view of the entire room without having to turn his head, an old habit from days he claimed to have left behind. The saloon was quiet this evening, just old Jasper Wilkins nursing a whiskey in the corner, and Doc Holloway reading his medical journal at his usual table near the back exit. Eliza Warren watched her bartender from her small office adjacent to the main room, the door ajar, as she tallied the week's earnings. Her shrewd eyes studied Ezra with the careful consideration of someone who had learned to read men well in her 20 years running the Crossroads. 8 years, Stone, she called, out dipping her pen in ink. Ever think about moving on? Man like you could have seen half the territory by now. The question earned her one of Ezra's rare, ghost-like smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Wouldn't know where to go, Miss Eliza. His voice was soft, measured, the kind that made folks lean in to hear better. It was also the kind of voice that made them underestimate him, which suited Ezra just fine. Of all the people in Redemption Creek, only Doc Holloway knew why those hands, now so careful with delicate glassware, had once been feared throughout the Western Territories. The doctor occasionally glanced up from his journal, his eyes meeting Ezra's with that knowing look they shared, the silent acknowledgement of secrets kept. Sheriff Taylor Hawkins' boots announced his arrival before he darkened the doorway, the rhythmic sound of spurs against packed dirt growing louder until the lawman's tall frame filled the entrance. He nodded respectfully to Eliza, then to Ezra, his eyes carrying a message only the bartender understood. 8 years of peace had done nothing to dull Ezra's ability to read men, and Hawkins' tight jaw and cautious glance over his shoulder spoke volumes. Getting some newcomers in town, Hawkins commented, accepting the coffee Ezra slid across the bar. 3 riders came in about an hour ago, stabled their horses at Miller's. Ezra's hand stilled for just a moment on the glass he was polishing. "That's so?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing, but there was a subtle shift in his posture that Eliza had learned to watch for over the years. It was the same barely perceptible tension he displayed when trouble rode into Redemption Creek. The sheriff lowered his voice. "Blackwater boys, if I'm not mistaken. Jackson Cole and his crew. Recognized." Cole from the wanted posters. Doc Holloway set down his journal, his weathered face creasing with concern. Thought they usually kept to the Northern Territories. Times change, Doc, Ezra replied, his voice carrying a weight that made Eliza look up sharply. She'd heard that tone only once before, 3 years ago, when those rustlers had tried to use the crossroads as a hideout. They hadn't stayed long. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a cloud of dust swirling against the glass like a premonition. Ezra reached beneath the bar, ostensibly checking his stock, but his fingers brushed against the false bottom of the cabinet, where old habits and older insurance policies lay waiting. The creak of leather saddles and the dull thud of boots on hard-packed earth drifted through the batwing doors. Too faint for most to notice, but Ezra noticed. Ezra noticed everything. 8 years of relative peace had done nothing to dull the instincts that had kept him alive through 2 decades of violence. Sheriff Hawkins stood slowly, coffee forgotten. "I should make my rounds, make sure our visitors are behaving themselves." Ezra nodded, a gesture so slight it was barely perceptible. The sheriff's hand rested briefly on his holstered Colt, then dropped away as he strode toward the door. "Taylor," Ezra called after him, his voice even, "might want to send young Miller over to Judge Parker's place. Tell him we could use a visit from the circuit court, just in case." The implication hung in the air. Judge Parker wouldn't come for at least 3 days, but his name carried weight, especially with outlaws who knew the judge's reputation for swift justice. Hawkins gave a curt nod before pushing through the batwing doors, leaving them swinging. In his wake, Eliza watched the exchange with growing concern. "Expecting trouble?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light despite the tension that had begun to crystallize in the air. "Something like that," Ezra replied, and for just a moment the careful facade of the quiet bartender flickered, revealing something harder underneath, something carved from steel and gunpowder. The sun continued its slow descent toward the distant mesas, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. In the growing dusk, the sound of approaching footsteps grew steadily louder, carrying with it echoes of a past that Ezra Stone had thought long buried. 8 years of peace were about to end, and in their place, old ghosts were rising from the dust of memory, their fingers curved around gun handles instead of reins, their intentions as deadly as any bullet. The Blackwater gang announced their arrival with the crash of batwing doors slamming against the wall. 3 men entered the Crossroads saloon, their spurs jangling a discordant warning with each heavy step. Jackson Cole led the way, flanked by the hulking Silas Rattlesnake Reed and the wiry, nervous-eyed Luke Bishop. Dust clung to their trail-worn clothes, but their guns gleamed with well-oiled care in the lamplight. These weren't saddle tramps or petty thieves. These were men who'd carved their reputations in blood across the territories, who killed as easily as others drew breath. Ezra's hands never stopped their methodical work behind the bar, but his eyes catalogued every detail. 3 riders, all armed. Cole with matching Remingtons on his hips, Reed with a shotgun slung across his back, and Bishop with a knife handle visible in his boot alongside his revolver. Combat stances, instinctively positioning themselves. With clear lines of fire, these men had fought together before, survived together. Well, Cole's voice rasped like a blade on leather, years of whiskey and trail dust evident in every syllable. "Quaint little watering hole you got here." He ran a gloved finger along the bar's surface, checking for dust and finding none. His eyes, cold as a winter creek, settled on Ezra. At least someone takes pride in their work. Ezra set down the glass. He'd been polishing, his movements unhurried. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" "Gentlemen," Reed laughed, the sound like grinding stones. "Hear that, Cole? He called us gentlemen." Cole studied Ezra with calculating eyes, taking in the bartender's careful stance, the way he kept his right hand free, the measured distance he maintained across the polished wood. "Your finest whiskey," he ordered, dropping onto a bar stool. "Leave the bottle." Eliza's fingers hovered near the shotgun she kept beneath her desk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Doc Holloway remained in his corner, seemingly absorbed in his journal. But his hand had moved. Closer to his medical bag, where Ezra knew he kept a derringer for emergencies. Old Jasper had gone completely still, decades of frontier survival instincts kicking in. Ezra reached for a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, his movements deliberate and smooth. He could feel their eyes on him, 3 sets watching for any sign of fear. Or resistance. He gave them neither. "You boys passing through or staying a while?" Ezra asked, setting out glasses with precise spacing. "Depends," Cole replied, studying his reflection in the polished bar top. "How's the local hospitality?" "Folks here mind their own business," Ezra said quietly, pouring measures of amber liquid. "Long as other folks do the same." Bishop, the youngest and most restless of the 3, snickered. "Long as they do the same," he mimicked, hand-straying. Toward his holster. "That's some kind of warning, barkeep?" "Just stating facts," Ezra replied, his voice level, but something in his tone made the young outlaw's hand freeze halfway to his weapon. Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem to know a lot about how things work around here for a simple bartender." "Man learns things," Ezra shrugged, resuming his endless glass polishing. The movement kept his hands visible while maintaining his reach to anything beneath the bar. Reed set his glass down hard enough to slosh bourbon onto the polished wood. "Man learns things, huh?" His hand dropped to his belt, pushing his duster back just enough to reveal his holstered Remington. "Learn anything about this?" "That's a good way to get yourself hurt," Ezra replied without looking up. The outlaws laughed. All except Cole, who studied Ezra with growing interest. "You got a name, barkeep?" "Ezra. Just Ezra." "Just Ezra," Cole repeated slowly, rolling the words around like he was tasting them. "You know what I think, just Ezra." He reached into his duster, the movement deliberately slow. "I think you're lying to me." He pulled out a folded paper, spreading it on the bar with exaggerated care. "And I don't like being lied to." Ezra finally looked up, his face impassive, as he studied the yellowed wanted poster. It showed a younger version of himself, hat pulled low, but his face clear enough. The name Nathaniel Graves was printed beneath it in bold letters, along with a reward amount that would make most men's eyes widen. 8 years is a long time, Ezra said quietly. Man changes. Cole's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Not that much. He gestured, and his men spread out further, taking strategic positions around the saloon. Thing about small towns, just Ezra, secrets have a way of getting out, especially when you know who to ask, or how to ask them. Eliza started to move toward the shotgun again, but Ezra's slight headshake stopped her. The tension in the room had ratcheted up several notches, the air thick with potential violence. "Whatever you're looking for," Ezra said carefully, "you won't find it here." "No." Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because what I'm looking for is the man they used to call the Phantom Rider. The ghost that disappeared. 8 years ago, after that bloodbath in Diablo Canyon. The legend that put more men in the ground than smallpox." Ezra's hands had stopped their endless motion, but his voice remained steady. "That man died a long time ago. See, that's where." "You're wrong." Cole's smile turned predatory. "Because I've spent a lot of time and money tracking down that man, and now that I've found him, we're going to have ourselves a long, interesting conversation about some things he took with him when he disappeared." Outside, the last light of day surrendered to darkness, and lanterns throughout Redemption Creek winked to life one by one, like stars appearing in the night sky. Inside the Crossroads Saloon, 2 dangerous men measured each other across a wooden bar, one who had sought redemption and one who had come to tear it away. The wind picked up outside, scouring the street with dust and whispering through the cracks in the weathered boards like a warning. Old Jasper Wilkins, sensing the gathering storm of violence, quietly slipped out the side door. Doc Holloway remained, his weathered face betraying nothing, but his eyes never left Ezra's hands. "Last chance," Ezra said, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't possessed seconds before. "Take your men, ride out, find another town." Cole stood slowly, his movement triggering his men to step closer, hands hovering near their holsters. "Or what? Just Ezra?" Reed sneered. "You'll serve us to death?" The answer, when it came, carried 2 decades of hard-earned experience in every quiet word. "Or I'll show you why some legends are better left buried." Cole studied Ezra for a long moment, then chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Strong words. From a man who's been hiding behind a bar for 8 years. He leaned forward, tobacco-stained breath hot across the polished wood. "Word is you've gone soft, Graves. Word is you hung up your guns because you didn't have the stomach for it anymore." Something flickered in Ezra's eyes then, not fear, but something colder, more dangerous. It vanished so quickly Cole might have imagined it, but it sent a shiver down his spine nonetheless. "Maybe I just found something worth protecting," Ezra replied, his gaze briefly meeting Eliza's before returning to Cole. Cole's smile widened. "And maybe that's why we're here." He gestured around the saloon. "Nice place. Be a shame if something happened to it, or to the fine folks of this town." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke, impossible to ignore. Outside, Sheriff Hawkins' spurs jangled as he paced the boardwalk, keeping watch through the windows. 2 more riders had entered town, taking up positions at either end of the main street. Cole's reinforcements, exactly as Ezra had expected. Men like Jackson Cole always held something in reserve. "You know," Cole continued, swirling the bourbon in his glass, "what I can't figure out is why the Phantom Rider would choose this dusty nowhere to disappear. Why a man with your particular talents would waste away pouring drinks for farmers and cowhands." He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Unless you're hiding something valuable enough to make you bury your guns and your name." Doc Holloway cleared his throat. "Town's got nothing worth your trouble, Cole. Just honest folks trying to get by." Cole's eyes never left Ezra's face. "Oh, I think this town's got exactly what I'm looking for, Doc." He tapped the wanted poster with one finger. 8 years ago, Nathaniel Graves vanished after the Diablo Canyon massacre. Same time as a certain strong box from the Territorial Bank went missing. A strong box containing $60,000 in gold certificates. The accusation hung in the air, but Ezra's expression remained impassive. "That money belonged to Judge Hollister," Cole continued. "The same Judge Hollister who hired me and my boys to track it down, and the man who took it." Ezra's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "Judge Hollister was killed at Diablo Canyon, shot in the back by his own men during the ambush." "That's the story some tell," Cole agreed with a mocking smile. "Others say the Phantom Rider gunned him down himself, took the gold, and vanished like the ghost they named him after." He spread his hands. "Now, personally, I don't much care which version is true. I'm just here for the gold. And whatever I need to do to find it." The night deepened outside as the standoff inside the Crossroads saloon intensified. Ezra's mind calculated angles and options, old training resurfacing like muscle memory. The odds were poor. 3 skilled gunmen. Inside, at least 2 more outside, and innocent townspeople who could get caught in the crossfire. "Hollow threats, Cole," Ezra said finally. "You start shooting up a town, you'll have every lawman in the territory on your trail within days." "Maybe," Cole conceded with a careless shrug, "but we both know I've outrun posses before." Question is, can this town outrun what's coming if you don't start talking? He downed his bourbon in one swallow, then fixed Ezra with a hard stare. "You've got till sunrise, Graves. Either you hand over that gold or we start making examples." "Starting with your lady friend over there?" Eliza stiffened at the threat, but her chin raised defiantly. "You don't scare me, Cole." "Should," Reed grinned, revealing a gold tooth that gleamed in the lamplight. "Last woman who said that to us, well." He let the implication hang in the air like a noose. "That's enough," Ezra's voice cut across the saloon, quiet but carrying a steel edge that made even Bishop's hand freeze on his gun handle. "You've said your piece. Now finish your drinks and get out." For a moment the only sound was the creak of the ceiling fan and the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the hills beyond town. Then Cole laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "8 years behind a bar really have made you forget who you are, Graves." He stood, adjusting his gun belt with practiced nonchalance. "Or maybe who you were. Either way, sunrise is coming." He nodded to his men, who backed toward the door, hands still hovering near their weapons. At the threshold, Cole turned back, his silhouette framed against the night beyond. "One more thing," he said, his voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "Just so you understand the stakes, we've got men watching every road out of town. Anyone tries to leave, anyone tries to bring help, well, let's just say examples, will be made early." With that final threat, the Blackwater gang melted into the darkness, leaving behind empty glasses and the promise of blood come morning. As the Batwing doors swung shut, Ezra's shoulders remained tense, his eyes fixed on the wanted poster still lying on the bar. The face that stared back at him was younger, harder, the face of a man who hadn't yet learned the true cost of violence. "Ezra," Eliza's voice was steady despite the fear she must be feeling. "What was he talking about? What gold?" "Doesn't matter," Ezra replied, finally looking up. "What matters is getting everyone somewhere safe before sunrise." Doc Holloway approached the bar, his medical bag clutched tightly in one hand. "Those men aren't bluffing, Ezra. I've treated enough of their victims to know what they're capable of." "No, Doc." Ezra's hand finally moved beneath the bar, emerging with an ornate key that he pressed into Eliza's palm. "Take everyone you can to the old mine tunnels. There's a chamber about half a mile in, stocked it years ago just in case. Lock yourselves in and don't come out till you hear Sheriff Hawkins' voice." "And you?" Eliza's fingers closed around the key, her eyes searching his face. "What will you do?" Ezra's gaze returned to the wanted poster, to the name and face he'd tried to leave behind. 8 years of peace, of building something worth protecting, all balanced now on the edge of a knife. "What I should have done 8 years ago," he said quietly, "finish what I started." As if summoned by his words, Sheriff Hawkins slipped through the side door, his expression grim. "Cole's men are setting up around town. Got at least 5 of them that I can see." Ezra nodded, having expected nothing less. "Get as many people to safety as you can, Taylor. Use the tunnels." Hawkins' hand fell to his gun belt. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." "You're not." Ezra's voice was firm. "You're protecting the innocent. That's your job." He glanced at the calendar hanging behind the bar. "Besides, Judge Parker will be here in 3 days. All we need to do is hold out until then." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They'd sent for Parker as a bluff, never expecting to actually need the circuit judge's authority. "And the gold?" Doc Holloway asked quietly. "Is it real? Did you really take it?" For the first time that night, something like uncertainty crossed Ezra's face. "It's complicated, Doc, but I promise you this. What happened at Diablo Canyon wasn't what people think. The truth hung unspoken between them. That some secrets were worth hiding, and some were worth dying for." As the night deepened and danger gathered like storm clouds on the horizon, Ezra Stone prepared to become Nathaniel Graves once more, if only long enough to protect the life and people he'd come to cherish. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and whispers of violence through the darkened streets of Redemption Creek. Morning would come soon enough, bringing with it a reckoning 8 years in the making. And when the sun rose, the legend of the Phantom Rider would either be laid to rest forever or reborn in blood and gunsmoke. The Blackwater gang announced their arrival with the crash of Batwing doors slamming against the wall. 3 men entered, The Crossroads Saloon, their spurs jangling a discordant warning with each heavy step. Jackson Cole led the way, flanked by the hulking Silas Rattlesnake Reed and the wiry, nervous-eyed Luke Bishop. Dust clung to their trail-worn clothes, but their guns gleamed with well-oiled care in the lamplight. These weren't saddle tramps or petty thieves. These were men who'd carved their reputations in blood across the territories, who killed as easily as others drew breath. Ezra's hands never stopped their methodical work behind the bar, but his eyes catalogued every detail. 3 riders, all armed, Cole with matching Remingtons on his hips, Reed with a shotgun slung across his back, and Bishop with a knife handle visible in his boot alongside his revolver. Combat stances, instinctively positioning themselves, with clear lines of fire. These men had fought together before, survived together. "Well, well," Cole's voice rasped like a blade on leather, years of whiskey and trail dust evident in every syllable. "Quaint little watering hole you got here." He ran a gloved finger along the bar's surface, checking for dust and finding none. His eyes, cold as a winter creek, settled on Ezra. At least someone takes pride in their work. Ezra set down the glass. He'd been polishing, his movements unhurried. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" "Gentlemen," Reed laughed, the sound like grinding stones. "Hear that, Cole? He called us gentlemen." Cole studied Ezra with calculating eyes, taking in the bartender's careful stance, the way he kept his right hand free, the measured distance he maintained across the polished wood. "Your finest whiskey," he ordered, dropping onto a bar stool. "Leave the bottle." Eliza's fingers hovered near the shotgun she kept beneath her desk. Doc Holloway remained in his corner, seemingly absorbed in his journal, but his hand had moved closer to his medical bag, where Ezra knew he kept a derringer for emergencies. Old Jasper had gone completely still, decades of frontier survival instincts kicking in. Ezra reached for a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, his movements deliberate and smooth. He could feel their eyes on him, 3 sets watching for any sign of fear or resistance. He gave them neither. "You boys, passing through or staying a while?" Ezra asked, setting out glasses with precise spacing. "Depends," Cole replied, studying his reflection in the polished bar top. "How's the local hospitality?" "Folks here mind their own business," Ezra said quietly, pouring measures of amber liquid. "Long as other folks do the same." Bishop, the youngest and most restless of the 3, snickered. "Long as they do the same," he mimicked, hand straying toward his holster. "That's some kind of warning, barkeep." "Just stating facts," Ezra replied, his voice level, but something in his tone made the young outlaw's hand freeze halfway to his. "Weapon?" Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem to know a lot about how things work around here for a simple bartender." "Man learns things," Ezra shrugged, resuming his endless glass polishing. The movement kept his hands visible while maintaining his reach to anything beneath the bar. Reed set his glass down hard enough to slosh bourbon onto the polished wood. "Man learns things, huh?" His hand dropped to his belt, pushing his duster back just enough to reveal his holstered Remington. "Learn anything about this?" "That's a good way to get yourself hurt," Ezra replied without looking up. The outlaws laughed, all except Cole, who studied Ezra with growing interest. "You got a name, barkeep?" "Ezra. Just Ezra." "Just Ezra," Cole repeated slowly, rolling the words around, like he was tasting them. "You know what I think, Just Ezra." He reached into his duster, the movement deliberately slow. "I think you're lying to me." He pulled out a folded paper, spreading it on the bar with exaggerated care. "And I don't like being lied to." Ezra finally looked up, his face impassive. As he studied the yellowed wanted poster, it showed a younger version of himself, hat pulled low, but his face clear enough. The name Nathaniel Graves was printed beneath it in bold letters, along with a reward amount that would make most men's eyes widen. 8 years is a long time, Ezra said quietly. Man changes. Cole's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Not that much. He gestured, and his men spread out further, taking strategic positions around the saloon. Thing about small towns, just Ezra. Secrets have a way of getting out, especially when you know who to ask. Or how to ask them. Eliza started to move toward the shotgun again, but Ezra's slight headshake stopped her. The tension in the room had ratcheted up several notches, the air thick with potential violence. "Whatever you're looking for," Ezra said carefully, "you won't find it here. No." Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because what I'm looking for is the man they used to call the Phantom Rider. The ghost that disappeared 8 years ago after that bloodbath in Diablo Canyon. The legend that put more men in the ground than smallpox." Ezra's hands had stopped their endless motion, but his voice remained steady. "That man died a long time ago." "See, that's where you're wrong." Cole's smile turned predatory. "Because I've spent a lot of time and money tracking down that man, and now that I've found him, we're going to have ourselves a long, interesting conversation about some things he took with him when he disappeared." The night had fully claimed Redemption Creek now, and more lanterns flickered to life along the main street. Through the windows, Ezra could see townsfolk hurrying home, doors and shutters closing as word of the Blackwater Gang's arrival spread. In the distance, the church bell tolled 9 times, each peal seeming to mark the passing of the town's peace. "You've said what you came to say," Ezra finally responded, his voice calm despite the storm gathering around him. "Now finish your drinks and be on your way." Cole laughed, the sound hollow as an empty grave. "Oh, we're not going anywhere, Graves, not until we get what we came for." He leaned forward, amber liquid sloshing in his glass. "The gold, Judge Hollister's gold, 60,000 in certificates that disappeared the same night you did." Doc Holloway shifted in his seat, drawing Cole's predatory gaze. "Something to add, old man?" "Just that you boys might be chasing ghosts," the doctor replied evenly. "Ain't nobody in town seen any gold. Ezra here came with nothing but the clothes on his back and a willingness to work." "Maybe," Cole conceded, turning back to Ezra. "Or maybe our friend here has been patient. 8 years is a long time to wait for heat to die down." His eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Graves, did you bury it, or did you have some other hidey hole in mind?" Before Ezra could respond, the batwing doors swung open again, and Sheriff Hawkins stepped inside, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. Behind him, framed in the doorway, stood 2 more men, Virgil Hammond, the blacksmith, and Caleb Norton, who ran the general store. Both carried shotguns, held loosely but ready. "Evening, gentlemen," Hawkins said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Just making my rounds, checking that our visitors are familiar with local ordinances." Cole's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Local ordinances. No gunplay within town limits," Hawkins replied, stepping further into the saloon. "No threatening of citizens, and all visitors clear out by the last bell." He glanced meaningfully at the clock on the wall, which just rang. Bishop's hand twitched toward his holster, but Cole raised a gloved hand, stopping him. "Now, Sheriff, that's hardly neighborly. We've paid for our drinks, engaged in pleasant conversation. Surely you wouldn't run, paying customers out into the night." "Hotels closed an hour ago," Hawkins said flatly. "Livery stables got room for your horses, and there's a perfectly good campground 1/2 a mile west of town." The silent standoff stretched between them, taut as a hangman's rope. Then Cole laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and stood slowly adjusting his gun belt. "Well, boys," he announced to his companions, "seems like Redemption Creek ain't as welcoming as we'd hoped." His eyes locked onto Ezra's. "But we're patient." "Men, ain't that right?" Reed and Bishop moved toward the door, their movements wary, hands never far from their weapons. Cole lingered, downing the last of his bourbon, before placing the glass precisely on the bar top. "We'll be seeing you soon, Graves," he promised, voice low enough that only Ezra could hear. "And next time, your friends won't be enough to save. You." With that, the Blackwater Gang backed out through the batwing doors, spurs jangling their discordant warning. As they disappeared into the night, the tension in the saloon didn't dissipate, but rather transformed, shifting from immediate danger to the certainty of future violence. Sheriff Hawkins waited until their footsteps faded before turning to the bartender. "How'd they find you, Ezra?" "Doesn't matter," Ezra replied, already moving around the bar. "What matters is getting folks to safety before they come back. And they will come back, Taylor. Men like Cole don't let go once they've caught a scent." Eliza emerged from her office, shotgun now held openly in capable hands. "They mentioned gold, Judge Hollister's gold. That true, Ezra? That why you came here?" For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the ceiling fan and the tick of the old clock on the wall. Then Ezra sighed, reaching beneath the bar to extract an ornate key. "Not here," he said quietly. "My room. 10 minutes." As the group dispersed, to secure the saloon and spread word through town, Ezra remained behind the bar, his eyes fixed on the wanted poster Cole had left behind. The face staring back at him was harder, younger, a man who hadn't yet learned the cost of the life he led. He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his vest pocket before reaching beneath the bar once more. The false bottom slid away, silently, revealing not gold certificates, but a pair of custom Colt peacemakers, their ivory handles yellowed with age, but their barrels gleaming with the same care he gave his glassware. For 8 years, they had waited in darkness, just as the man who bore them had waited, hoping never to need them again. Ezra lifted them slowly, feeling their familiar weight settle into his palms like old friends returning. With practiced motions that required no thought, his fingers checked firing pins, cylinders, triggers, the ritual as familiar as breathing despite the years of disuse. "Thought you'd hung those up for good?" Eliza's voice came from the doorway, startling him with its softness. "So did I," Ezra replied, not looking up. "Funny how the past finds ways to catch up, no matter how far you run." "Is it true? About the gold?" Ezra's hands stilled on the weapons. "It's complicated, but not like Cole thinks." "Uncomplicated for me, then," she pushed, moving closer. 8 years, Ezra. 8 years you've poured drinks in my saloon, fixed my roof, kept my books straight. Never asked questions about where you came from or what you were running from. Her voice softened. "If I'm risking my town for you, I deserve the truth." Ezra was silent for a long moment, then nodded, holstering the Colts with a smooth motion that revealed more of his past than any words could. "You do," he admitted, "and so do the others, but it's not a story for everyone to hear." 10 minutes. Later, Ezra's sparse room above the saloon held a council of war. Sheriff Hawkins leaned against the wall near the window, keeping watch on the street below. Doc Holloway sat in the room's only chair, while Eliza perched on the edge of the narrow bed. 2 oil lamps cast long shadows as Ezra paced the worn floorboards, the unfamiliar weight of his gun belt around his hips after so many years. "Diablo. Canyon," he began without preamble. 8 years ago. I was riding with the territorial marshals then, part of a special detachment hunting the Dalton brothers." "The train robbers?" Hawkins interrupted. Ezra nodded. "Among other things, they'd hit 3 banks and 2 payroll shipments in as many months. Governor had put together a special fund to bring them in, $50,000 for the whole gang, dead or alive. Judge Hollister oversaw the fund," Doc Holloway added, surprising them all. At their looks, he shrugged. "I read the papers, even way out here. More than oversaw it," Ezra continued. "He administered it personally, handpicked the marshals assigned to the case, including me." His pacing stopped, and he gazed out the window at the darkened town. What none of us knew was that Hollister was working with the Daltons all along. The robberies, the killings, all part of an elaborate scheme to embezzle territorial funds. "How'd it work?" Eliza asked, her shrewd mind already putting pieces together. "Simple enough. Hollister would announce a new shipment of gold or cash, leak the route to the Daltons. They'd hit it, keep a cut, and funnel the rest back to Hollister through various proxies. Meanwhile, he'd claim the full amount as stolen, file for reimbursement from the territorial governor and pocket the difference. And the manhunt was just for show, Hawkins concluded grimly. More than that, Ezra's voice hardened. It was insurance. Hollister needed the Daltons eliminated eventually. Too many loose ends. So he set up the ambush at Diablo Canyon, fed us false intelligence that the gang was holed up there with minimal protection. The room fell silent as they absorbed the implications. Finally, Doc Holloway spoke, his voice soft with dawning comprehension. It wasn't the Daltons waiting in that canyon. No, Ezra confirmed, turning back to face them. It was hired guns, 15 of them positioned on the high ground, armed with rifles. 5 marshals rode into that canyon. I was the only one who rode out. His face was expressionless, but his knuckles whitened around the worn grip of his Colt. By the time I fought my way clear and circled back to our camp, Hollister was gone, along with the strongbox containing the reward money, which was supposed to stay with the territorial clerk. 60,000 in gold certificates, Eliza murmured. But that doesn't explain how you ended up with it, or here. I tracked him, Ezra said simply. 3 days across the Badlands, until I caught up with him at an abandoned trading post near the border. He was meeting with someone, never found out who. They had the certificates spread out on a table, arguing over the split. The images flashed through his mind as vivid as the day it happened. The confrontation, Hollister's shocked face, the desperate firefight that followed. The judge's hired gun, falling with 3 bullets in his chest, and Hollister himself, wounded but defiant to the end. He admitted everything. The scheme, the ambush, all of it. Said the territory was corrupt anyway, that everyone took their cut. Said I should take mine and disappear. Ezra's voice grew distant. When I refused, he went for a hidden derringer. I was faster. You killed a federal judge, Hawkins stated flatly, though without judgment. I killed a criminal who happened to wear a judge's robes, Ezra corrected, but I knew how it would look. His allies in the territorial government would bury the truth, paint me as the thief and murderer. So you took the money and ran, Eliza concluded. I took the ledger, Ezra clarified. Hollister's record of every transaction, every bribe, every conspirator. And yes, I took the certificates too, not to keep, but as evidence. He sighed, suddenly looking older in the lamplight. But evidence needs a court willing to hear it, and there wasn't one to be found. Every territorial judge was either in Hollister's pocket or too afraid to move against his friends. 8 years is a long time to hold on to evidence, Doc Holloway observed mildly. 8 years is how long it takes for things to change, Ezra replied. For new judges to be appointed, old alliances to wither, witnesses to feel safe enough to come forward. Understanding dawned on Hawkins' face. Judge Parker, Ezra nodded. Circuit Court judge appointed 3 years ago, man with a reputation for absolute integrity. I've been corresponding with him for months, through intermediaries. He's finally agreed to convene a special grand jury to hear the evidence. That's why you sent for him today, Eliza realized. You were already planning to move. The certificates and the ledger are evidence in a federal investigation now, Ezra confirmed. And apparently word has leaked to the wrong ears. Cole isn't just a bandit, Hawkins guessed. He's working for whoever stands to lose when this comes to light. Almost certainly. These men weren't just Hollister's conspirators. They were his protectors, powerful men who've spent 8 years believing their secret died with him. The room fell silent again as the full weight of the situation settled over them. Not just a gang of outlaws hunting stolen gold, but powerful, corrupt officials eliminating witnesses before their crimes could be exposed. So, what do we do? Eliza finally asked. You leave, Ezra stated flatly. All of you, and anyone else in town who can't fight. Use the old mining tunnels, head for Fort Laramie. Once you're clear, I'll deal with Cole." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Hawkins demanded. "Even if it's just the 3 we saw tonight, those are hard men, Ezra, and I'd bet my badge. There are more waiting out there in the dark." "I've counted 5 so far," Ezra confirmed. "Cole, Reed, and Bishop in town, 2 more watching the roads, probably another 3 or 4 nearby." His hand rested on his Colt, the gesture unconscious, but telling. "But they're not here for a straight fight. They want the gold, yes, but more importantly, they want the ledger, and they want to make an example of me. Which means they'll take their time," Doc Holloway concluded grimly. "Draw it out. Make the town suffer to force your hand." "Exactly. They'll start with threats, move to destruction of property, then violence. They want me desperate, making mistakes." Ezra's expression hardened. "But that gives us time. Get the townspeople to safety tonight. By morning, when Cole realizes his leverage is gone, he'll change tactics, get impatient. That's when he'll make mistakes." "And the evidence?" Eliza pressed. "The certificates? The ledger? Where are they?" For the first time that night, a ghost of a smile touched Ezra's lips. 8 years is a long time to prepare, Eliza. They're safe, and when Judge Parker arrives, they'll speak for themselves." Hawkins pushed away from the wall, his face set with determination. "I'll start organizing. The evacuation. Virgil and Caleb are already spreading the word. We can move the women and children through the tunnels within 2 hours. I'll need medical supplies," Doc Holloway added, rising stiffly from his chair. "And I'm staying. Those boys will need patching up before this is over, one way or another." Eliza stood as well, her expression brooking no argument. "It's my saloon, my town. I'm staying too." Ezra looked as though he might protest, then simply nodded, recognizing the futility of arguing. "Hawkins, get word to Parker if you can. Let him know he might be riding into more than he bargained for." As the others moved toward the door, Eliza lingered, her eyes searching Ezra's face. 8 years, she said quietly. 8 years you've lived here, worked here, been part of this community. Wasn't just hiding, was it? Ezra looked away, his gaze falling on the dusty streets of the town that had become his home. "No," he admitted softly. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped running from something and started running towards something else. And now?" His hand fell to the worn ivory grip of his Colt, fingers tracing the familiar patterns. "Now I finish what I started, so I can come back to what I found." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and whispers through the darkened streets of Redemption Creek. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the desolation of choices made and paths taken. Morning would come soon enough, bringing with it a reckoning 8 years in the making, and when the sun rose, the legend of the Phantom Rider would either be laid to rest forever or reborn in blood and gunsmoke. As Eliza closed the door behind her, Ezra moved to the small chest at the foot of his bed. The key turned smoothly in the lock, revealing not gold certificates, but something he valued far more, a faded daguerreotype of a woman with laughing eyes and a gentle smile. Margaret, his wife, dead these 10 years from the fever that had swept through their small Kansas homestead. "Almost done, Maggie," he whispered to the silent image. "Almost time to rest." He replaced the photograph carefully, then withdrew a small leather-bound book from beneath it. Hollister's ledger, the record of corruption that had cost 5 good men their lives and driven Ezra into exile. Its pages contained enough evidence to hang a dozen powerful men who wouldn't hesitate to burn Redemption Creek to the ground rather than face justice. Cole and his gang were just the beginning. Even if Ezra survived tomorrow, there would be others, hired guns, corrupt lawmen, perhaps even federal marshals operating under false orders. The path to justice would be written in blood, and not all of it would belong to the guilty. But as he checked his Colts one final time and gazed out at the town that had given him sanctuary for 8 long years, Ezra Stone, the man once known as the Phantom Rider, knew with cold certainty that some prices were worth paying. Some fights couldn't be avoided, only postponed. And sometimes the past didn't just catch up with you, it dragged you back into its darkness, demanding a final reckoning. Dawn was still hours away, but already Ezra could feel the weight of it approaching, the day when Nathaniel Graves would ride once more, perhaps for the last time. Dawn broke, cold and grey over Redemption Creek, the rising sun obscured by heavy clouds that promised rain before nightfall. Ezra stood at the window of his room above the saloon, watching as the town stirred to uneasy life. Most buildings remained shuttered, the usual morning bustle absent. Those few townsfolk who ventured out moved quickly, eyes darting nervously toward the outskirts where the Blackwater gang had made camp. Most folks got out during the night, Sheriff Hawkins reported, joining Ezra at the window. Carter's leading them through the old mine tunnels toward Fort Laramie. Should reach the cavalry outpost by sundown tomorrow if they push hard. Ezra nodded, his expression betraying nothing of the weight that pressed upon him. Who stayed? Doc Holloway. Eliza, of course, Virgil at the smithy, Caleb from the general store, Pastor Simmons, though I told him he'd be more use with the evacuees. Hawkins sighed, removing his hat to run fingers through graying hair. Maybe a dozen others, men with no families to protect mostly. Or nothing left to lose, Ezra added quietly. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. You know they're not just here for you, don't you? Whatever's in that ledger you've been holding on to, it threatens powerful people. Cole and his boys are just the first wave. I know. Ezra turned from the window, checking the action on his Colts one final time before holstering them with a fluid motion that spoke of muscle memory, undimmed by 8 years of disuse. That's why we need to end this quickly, before reinforcements arrive. Hawkins' brow furrowed. You're not thinking of facing them alone. It's me they want. It's the ledger they want. Hawkins corrected sharply. You're just the loose end. They need to tie up. A knock at the door interrupted them. Eliza entered without waiting for a response, her usual practical dress replaced by a split riding skirt that offered freedom of movement. A shotgun was cradled in her arms with the casual comfort of long familiarity. They're moving, she announced without preamble. 5 riders coming up the main street. Cole's in the lead. Ezra nodded, unsurprised. They waited longer than I expected. They spent the night getting the measure of us, Hawkins explained, moving to peer through the window. Counting how many stayed looking for weaknesses, and now they're tired of waiting. Ezra buckled on his gun belt, the weight familiar yet strange after so many years. Eliza, you and Doc stay in the back room. Hawkins, get Virgil and Caleb to cover the side entrances. I'll meet Cole out front. Eliza's expression hardened. Like hell you will. This is my saloon, my town, and my fight, Ezra countered quietly. Not anymore. Her voice softened slightly. 8 years, Ezra. 8 years you've been one of us. That makes your enemies our enemies. Before Ezra could respond, hoofbeats echoed from the street below, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Cole's voice carried clearly in the morning stillness. Graves, get out here, you ghost-riding son of a bitch. Time to finish what started at Diablo Canyon. Ezra moved for the door, but Eliza blocked his path, her eyes fierce. Backstairs, she said firmly. Element of surprise. I'll go out the front, keep them talking. Eliza, not negotiable. Her hand rested briefly on his arm. Besides, they won't shoot a woman in cold blood, not with the whole town watching. Ezra wanted to argue that men like Cole would do exactly that, but the determination in her eyes brooked no argument. With a curt nod to Hawkins, he headed for the back stairs, while Eliza squared her shoulders and descended to the main floor of the saloon. Through the rippled glass of the side window, Ezra watched as she pushed through the batwing doors to confront the Blackwater gang. 5 riders, as reported, Cole, Reed and Bishop from the night before, plus 2 new faces. All armed, all looking like they'd slept poorly and were eager to make someone pay for it. Mr. Cole, Eliza's voice carried clearly, betraying none of the fear she must feel. You're disturbing my customers. Cole laughed, the sound ugly in the morning quiet. Don't see many customers, ma'am. In fact, seems like most of your town decided to take an unexpected trip. Tuesday's always slow, she replied evenly. Now state your business or move along. Reed spat a stream of tobacco juice that splattered near Eliza's boots. Our business is with Graves, Nathaniel Graves, the man you've been harboring. Don't know anyone by that name. Really? Cole dismounted slowly, his spurs jangling a discordant warning with each step toward her. Because I'd wager half the territory that your barkeep is upstairs right now, hoping we'll just ride away if he hides long enough. Ezra moved silently through the back room of the saloon, positioning himself at the window that overlooked the side alley. Hawkins had stationed Virgil and Caleb as planned, each man armed and waiting in the shadows. Further down the street, he could make out the glint of Doc Holloway's spectacles from the upper window of his practice. All in all, perhaps a dozen defenders against 5 seasoned killers. Poor odds, but better than he'd faced in the past. Even if this man you're looking for was here, Eliza was saying, her voice carrying clearly to Ezra's position. What business would you have with him? Last I checked, this was still a law-abiding territory. Our business is simple, Cole replied, his hand resting casually on his holstered Remington. He took something that doesn't belong to him, something valuable. We're here to collect it. And if he doesn't have it? Cole's smile was cold as a winter creek. Then we burn this town to the ground and sift through the ashes until we find it. The casual brutality of the threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Ezra had heard enough. With silent steps honed through, years as the Phantom Rider, he slipped through the back door and into the alley, circling toward the main street. Years in Redemption Creek had taught him every shadow, every potential vantage point. I'm going to give you one chance, Mr. Cole, Eliza said, her voice unwavering despite the 5 guns trained in her general direction. Take your men and ride out. Whatever grievance you have with Mr. Stone isn't worth dying over. Bishop laughed nervously. Listen to her, Cole, like we're the ones outnumbered. Shut up, Luke, Cole snapped, his eyes scanning the seemingly deserted buildings. The lady's got sand, I'll give her that, but she's bluffing. He raised his voice, projecting toward the upper windows of the saloon. Ain't you, Graves, hiding behind a woman's skirts now? That what 8 years of pouring whiskey has reduced the Phantom Rider to? The taunt was meant to draw him out, to force him into the open where 5 guns could cut him down before he cleared leather. A younger Ezra might have risen to the bait. The Phantom Rider of legend certainly would have. Instead, Ezra Stone continued his silent circuit, using the alleyway between the general store and the gunsmith to position himself behind the Blackwater gang. When he finally stepped into the street, it was at their backs, his Colt still holstered, but his stance ready. Hiding was never my style, Cole, he called, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. The effect was instant. All 5 men whirled, hands dropping to weapons, but found themselves facing not just Ezra, but rifle barrels protruding from windows and doorways all along the street. The trap had been baited, and the Blackwater gang had walked right into it. Cole recovered first, his hand freezing inches from his holster as he assessed the situation. Well, the ghost himself in the flesh. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Thought you'd have gone grey after all these years of living soft. Some things don't change, Ezra replied evenly, his own hands deliberately away from his holsters, like the fact that you're still working for other men's money, doing other men's killing. Speaking of money, Cole's eyes narrowed. Where's Hollister's gold, Graves? That's all we want. Give it up and maybe, just maybe, we ride out without burning this shithole town to the ground." "There is no gold," Ezra said, taking a measured step forward. "Never was. Just a ledger full of names, men who'd kill to keep their secrets buried." "Bullshit," Reed spat, his meaty hand tightening on his shotgun. "Hollister had 60,000 in certificates. Everyone knows you took it after you murdered him." "Is that what they told you?" Ezra's gaze never left Cole's face. "That I killed him for the money. Interesting story. Wrong, but interesting." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Cole's weathered features. "Doesn't matter why you killed him. What matters is that gold. Hand it over, and we'll consider our business. Concluded? And if I don't have it?" Cole's smile returned, cold and predatory. "Then we start shooting folks until you remember where you stashed it." He gestured toward Eliza with his chin. "Starting with your lady friend here." The tension in the street crystallized, sharp as broken glass. For a long moment no one moved. The tableau frozen in the grey morning light. 5 outlaws, with their hands hovering near weapons, a dozen townspeople with guns trained from concealment, and between them 2 figures facing each other across years of violence and retribution. 8 years ago, Ezra finally broke the silence, his voice carrying clearly to all who listened. Judge Hollister set up 5 U.S. Marshals to be ambushed at Diablo Canyon. Good men with families. They died because Hollister and his conspirators had been embezzling territorial funds, and those marshals were getting too close to the truth. The revelation rippled through the street. Even Cole seemed taken aback, though he recovered quickly. "Save the stories for the campfire, Graves. Where's the gold?" "There never was any gold," Ezra continued as if Cole hadn't spoken. "Just certificates, evidence of Hollister's crimes. Evidence I've been protecting for 8 years, waiting for the right time, the right judge." His eyes hardened. "That time has come. Judge Parker arrives tomorrow to convene a special grand jury. The ledger, the certificates, they'll all be presented as evidence." Cole's laugh held no humor. "And you think we'll just let that happen? You think the men who sent us will allow their names to be dragged through a territorial court?" "I think," Ezra replied quietly, "that you've been lied to, Cole. Whoever sent you didn't tell you what you were really up against. They didn't tell you that I wasn't working alone all these years." As if on cue, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the east end of town. A rider appeared through the morning mist, then another and another, a full detachment of U.S. Marshals, their badges catching the morning light as they formed a line across the street. The lead marshal, a grizzled veteran with a scar bisecting his left cheek, nudged his horse forward. "Jackson Cole, Silas Reed, Luke Bishop, you and your companions are under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, attempted murder of a federal witness, and threatening officers of the court." Cole's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is a setup. There ain't supposed to be marshals within 50 miles of here." "Plans change," the scarred marshal replied coolly. "Drop your weapons. All of you." For a heartbeat, the outcome hung in the balance. Ezra could see the calculation in Cole's eyes. 5 against 20, with townspeople positioned in buildings all around them. Suicide odds, even for the Blackwater gang, but men like Cole didn't surrender easily. His hand inched toward his holster, a decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Tell your bosses," he hissed at Ezra, "that this isn't over. Men like them don't just disappear because of some ledger." "Drop the gun, Cole," Ezra warned, his own hands still deliberately away from his holsters. "Don't make this any worse than it already is." The subtle shift in Cole's stance was all the warning Ezra needed. Years of instinct took over as Cole went for his Remington in a lightning-fast draw that had ended a dozen men before him. But the Phantom Rider hadn't been born from myth. Ezra's hands moved in a blur, both Colts clearing leather before Cole's Remington had fully left its holster. 2 shots rang out as one, the impact lifting Cole off his feet and throwing him backward into the dust of the street. For a moment, Perfect stillness descended on Redemption Creek. Then Reed bellowed in rage, swinging his shotgun toward Ezra, only to be cut down by 3 simultaneous shots from Marshall's rifles. Bishop froze, his hands shooting skyward, while the other 2 Blackwater riders followed suit, suddenly eager to demonstrate their willingness to surrender. Ezra holstered one Colt, keeping the other trained on Bishop as the marshals dismounted and moved to secure the prisoners. The scarred marshal approached, eyeing the bodies of Cole and Reed with professional detachment, before turning to Ezra. "Been a long time, Nate," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Too long, Jim," Ezra replied, clasping it firmly. "Wasn't sure you'd make it in time." Marshal James Harker, once Ezra's partner in the Territorial Service, gestured to the men behind him. "Judge Parker sent us ahead when your message reached him. Said something about expecting trouble." His gaze fell to the Colts on Ezra's hips. Guess he was right. Eliza approached cautiously, her shotgun lowered but not discarded. "You 2 know each other?" "Jim and I rode together before Diablo Canyon," Ezra explained. "He was on assignment in Texas when Hollister set up the ambush." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Been my contact with the territorial authorities ever since." Understanding dawned on her face. "All these years, you weren't just hiding, you were building a case." "Justice takes time," Harker interjected, turning to supervise as his men disarmed and secured the surviving Blackwater riders, "especially when the men you're after own half the judges in the territory." "But not Parker," Ezra added. "Parker's different." "Parker's incorruptible," Harker agreed. "And he's been waiting a long time to bring down Hollister's conspiracy." He glanced at the bodies being loaded onto horses. "These won't be the last. Men they send, you know." "I know." Ezra's gaze swept the town that had sheltered him for 8 years, taking in the faces of those who had chosen to stand with him despite the danger. "But they'll be dealt with the same way." As the marshals prepared to depart with their prisoners, Harker lingered, his voice dropping so only Ezra could hear. "The ledger. You still have it? And the certificates?" "Safe," Ezra confirmed. "Been adding to it over the years. Names, dates, transactions. Everything needed to bring down what's left of Hollister's network." Harker nodded, satisfied. "Parker will be here by noon tomorrow. Until then," he gestured to 4 marshals who remained mounted, "these men will stay as insurance against any more unexpected visitors." The tension that had gripped Redemption Creek since the previous night began to dissipate as the marshals rode out with their prisoners. Townspeople emerged cautiously from buildings, gathering in small groups to discuss the morning's events. Doc Holloway moved among them, checking for injuries, while Sheriff Hawkins organized a detail to deal with the bodies. Eliza sidled up to Ezra as he stood watching the activity, his Colts once more hidden beneath his bartender's apron. "So," she said quietly, "Nathaniel Graves, the Phantom Rider, man of mystery and legend." "Not anymore," he replied. "Just Ezra Stone now, bartender, citizen of Redemption Creek." She studied him thoughtfully. "And after tomorrow? After Parker gets his evidence and the case is closed? Will you stay Ezra Stone, or will the Phantom ride again?" The question hung between them, weighted with 8 years of history and possibility. Ezra gazed down the street toward the saloon that had become his haven, the town that had become his. The Phantom was born from necessity," he said finally, "and he'll die the same way. Once Parker has the ledger, once the conspirators are brought to justice." He turned to her, a genuine smile warming his features for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "I reckon Redemption Creek could use a permanent bartender." Eliza's answering smile held more warmth than the morning sun breaking through the clouds overhead. "Reckon it could at that," she agreed, her hand finding his as they walked together toward the Crossroads Saloon, leaving the ghosts of the past where they belonged, in the dust of the street behind them. 8 years ago, Ezra broke the tense silence, his voice carrying clearly down the dusty main street. Judge Hollister set up 5 U.S. Marshals to be ambushed at Diablo Canyon. Good men died because Hollister's conspirators were embezzling territorial funds. The revelation rippled through the onlookers. Even Cole seemed taken aback, though he recovered quickly. "Touching story," Cole sneered, "but I didn't ride all this way for a history lesson. Where's the gold, Graves?" "There never was any gold," Ezra replied. "Just certificates, evidence of Hollister's crimes, evidence that's about to see the light of day when Judge Parker arrives tomorrow." Cole laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. "You think we'll just ride away and let that happen? The men who sent us would rather see this whole town burning than allow their names dragged through a territorial court." "I think," Ezra countered, "that whoever sent you didn't tell you what you were really walking into." As if summoned by his words, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the east end of town. A rider appeared through the morning mist. Then another, and another, a full detachment of U.S. Marshals, their badges gleaming in the grey light as they formed a line across the street. The lead marshal, a grizzled veteran with a distinctive scar bisecting his left cheek, nudged his horse forward. "Jackson Cole, Silas Reed, Luke Bishop, you and your companions are under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, attempted murder of a federal witness, and threatening officers of the court." Cole's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is a set-up. Drop your weapons," the scarred marshal commanded. "All of you." For a heartbeat, the outcome hung in the balance. Ezra could see the calculation in Cole's eyes. 5 against 20, with townspeople positioned in buildings. All around them, suicide odds, even for the Blackwater gang. But men like Cole didn't surrender easily. His hand inched toward his holster, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Tell your bosses," he hissed at Ezra, "that this isn't over." "Drop the gun, Cole," Ezra warned, his own hand still deliberately away from his holsters. The subtle shift in Cole's stance was all the warning Ezra needed. Years of instinct took over as Cole went for his Remington in a lightning draw that had ended a dozen men before him. But the Phantom Rider hadn't earned his reputation through exaggeration. Ezra's hands moved in a blur, both Colts clearing leather before Cole's Remington had fully left its holster. 2 shots rang out as one, the impact lifting Cole off his feet and throwing him backward into the dust. For a moment, perfect stillness descended on Redemption Creek. Then Reed bellowed in rage, swinging his shotgun toward Ezra, only to be cut down by simultaneous shots from the marshal's rifles. Bishop froze, hands shooting skyward, while the other 2 Blackwater riders followed suit, suddenly eager to demonstrate their willingness to surrender. The scarred marshal approached, eyeing the bodies with professional detachment. "Been a long time, Nate," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Too long, Jim," Ezra replied, clasping it firmly. "You two know each other?" Eliza asked, approaching cautiously. "Jim Harker and I rode together before Diablo Canyon," Ezra explained. "He was on assignment in Texas when Hollister set up the ambush. Been my contact in the territory ever since." Understanding dawned on her face. "All these years, you weren't just hiding." "Justice takes time," Harker interjected, "especially when the men you're after own half the judges in the territory. But Parker's different. Parker's incorruptible." As the marshals departed with their prisoners, Harker left 4 men behind as protection until Parker's arrival. The tension that had gripped Redemption Creek began to dissipate as townspeople emerged. From hiding, Eliza sidled up to Ezra as he watched the activity, his Colts once more hidden beneath his bartender's apron. "So, Nathaniel Graves, the Phantom Rider. Will you stay Ezra Stone, or will the Phantom ride again?" And the question hung between them, weighted with 8 years of history. Ezra gazed toward the saloon that had become his haven, the town that had become his home. "The Phantom was born from necessity," he said finally, "and he'll die the same way. Once Parker has the ledger, once justice is done." He turned to her, a genuine smile warming his features. I reckon Redemption Creek could use a permanent bartender." Eliza's answering smile held more warmth than the morning sun breaking through the clouds overhead. "Reckon it could at that." The day passed with the strange tension that follows violence, a town holding its collective breath, waiting to see if the danger had truly passed. Ezra knew better than to believe Cole's death meant an end to the threat. The men behind Hollister's conspiracy were powerful, desperate, and unlikely to surrender without a final push. Nightfall came early, hastened by storm clouds gathering over the distant mountains. Sheriff Hawkins had organized a watch rotation, with marshals and townspeople taking shifts at key positions throughout Redemption Creek. The Crossroads Saloon, normally filled with music and conversation at this hour, stood silent, save for the occasional creak of floorboards as sentries made their rounds. Ezra sat at a corner table, the ledger open before him, its pages filled with names, dates, and figures documenting 8 years of corruption. Across from him, Marshal Harker nursed a whiskey, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. "Judge Parker should be here by noon tomorrow," Harker said, breaking the comfortable silence between old comrades. "Once he has this," he tapped the ledger, "the whole network comes down." Ezra nodded, turning a page to reveal more damning evidence. Hollister wasn't just embezzling. He was selling information to land speculators, pardoning criminals for bribes, manipulating trial outcomes for powerful friends. "And Judge Parker can prove it all. With this and my testimony, yes." Ezra closed the ledger, securing it with a leather strap. 8 years of watching, waiting, gathering evidence. It's finally enough. Harker leaned forward, lowering his voice, though the saloon was empty, save for them and Eliza, who was taking inventory behind the bar. "What about afterward? The Phantom Rider? There are still bounties on that name in 3 territories." A ghost of a smile touched Ezra's lips. "The Phantom was a tool, Jim, a necessary shadow that kept witnesses safe and gathered the evidence we needed." His eyes drifted to Eliza, who looked up as if sensing his gaze. "Ezra Stone is who I am now, who I want to be." Harker studied him, thoughtfully, then raised his glass in a silent toast. "To new beginnings, then." The peaceful moment shattered as the front doors burst open. One of the marshal's men staggered in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Riders," he gasped, collapsing into a chair. "Coming in from the north, at least 20 men heavily armed." Harker was on his feet instantly. "Laughlin's men." "Looks that way," the wounded marshal confirmed. "Professional guns, not like Cole's bunch. Senator William Laughlin, a name that appeared frequently in Hollister's ledger, the power behind much of the corruption they'd been fighting. If he was sending men personally, the situation had escalated beyond hired bandits." "How long?" Ezra asked, already moving to secure the ledger. "Less than an hour," the marshal replied. "They're taking their time, making sure we see them coming." Harker cursed softly. "We need to get that ledger out of town. If they capture it—" "They won't," Ezra interrupted, his decision already made. "You take the ledger. Get it to Parker. I'll handle Laughlin's men." "With what?" Harker demanded. "We have 4 marshals, half of them wounded, and a handful of townspeople. Against professional gunmen. Those are suicide odds, Nate. Not if they're focused on me." Ezra's voice took on the cold precision that had once made the Phantom Rider a legend. "Laughlin wants me as much as he wants the ledger. I'm the only witness who can connect him directly to Hollister's death." Understanding dawned on Harker's face. "You're going to be the bait." "I'm going to be the ghost," Ezra corrected. "One last time." Eliza stepped forward, having overheard the exchange. "You're planning to lead them away from town," she stated flatly. "Draw them into a chase." Ezra nodded, meeting her eyes directly. "It's the only way to ensure the ledger reaches Parker safely." "And what happens to you?" Her voice remained steady, though her knuckles whitened around the glass she held. "With luck, I circle back once the ledger is secure." He didn't voice the alternative, that the Phantom Rider's final ride might well be his last. Harker cleared his throat. "There's another option, the mine tunnels. They run all through these hills, some all the way to Fort Laramie." "Too slow." Ezra shook his head. "Parker needs that ledger by morning, or Lachlan's political allies might intervene." "Then I'm coming with you," Eliza declared, setting down the glass with finality. Out of the question, Ezra and Harker responded simultaneously. "Not negotiable," she countered, eyes flashing. "I know these hills better than either of you, the back trails, the hidden passes, places a man being hunted might need to know." The logic was undeniable, though Ezra's instinct was to protect her at all costs. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "Life's dangerous," she replied simply. "Been that way since long before you arrived, Phantom." The faint use of his old title, spoken not with fear or awe, but with the easy familiarity of someone who saw beyond the legend, settled something in Ezra's chest. He nodded once, accepting her decision. "We'll need fast horses," he said, turning to business, "and a convincing decoy for the ledger." Within 20 minutes the plan was set. Harker would take the real ledger and 2 marshals, using the confusion of the coming confrontation to slip out the back way toward Parker's last known position. Ezra and Eliza would head east, conspicuously carrying a saddlebag that appeared to hold the precious documents, but actually contained only blank paper and old newspapers. Sheriff Hawkins and the remaining able-bodied men would defend the town as best they could, creating the impression that the ledger remained secured in the saloon's safe. With luck, Lachlan's men would split their forces, some remaining to search Redemption Creek, while others pursued the fleeing witnesses. 1 hour, Harker promised, as they prepared to part ways in the stables behind the saloon. "Get them to chase you for 1 hour. That's all I need to reach Parker's escort." Ezra checked the action on his Colts one last time, before sliding them into their holsters. The familiar weight of the gun belt around his hips no longer felt strange. It felt like reclaiming a part of himself long set aside, but never truly forgotten. 1 hour, he agreed. Then we lose them in Devil's Backbone and circle back toward Fort Laramie. Harker clasped his hand firmly. "Ride safe, Phantom." "Godspeed, old friend." As Harker and his men slipped away through the gathering darkness, Ezra turned to find Eliza already mounted, her split riding skirt arranged practically, a Winchester repeater secured to her saddle. Her determination was evident in every line of her body. "Ready?" he asked, swinging into his own saddle. "Been ready for 8 years, she replied with a half-smile. "Just didn't know what for until tonight." The distant sound of approaching riders carried on the night wind, punctuated by the low rumble of thunder. The storm was moving in faster than expected, which would work to their advantage. Rain would mask their trail once they reached the rocky highlands. "Remember," Ezra cautioned as they prepared to ride, "we need to be seen leaving town. Make it convincing, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary." Eliza nodded, checking her shotgun one final time. "And if it becomes necessary?" A cold smile touched Ezra's lips, one that belonged to the Phantom rather than the bartender. "Then they learn why some legends are best left undisturbed." With that, they spurred their horses forward, emerging from the stables at a gallop. They thundered down the main street, just as the first of Lachlan's riders appeared at the northern edge of town. The ruse worked perfectly. Shouts erupted, and immediately a group of pursuers broke off from the main force, giving chase to the fleeing pair. The storm broke just as they reached the eastern foothills, fat raindrops splattering in the dust and quickly turning the trail slick and treacherous. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rugged terrain in brief, harsh flashes that made the shadows seem deeper in their wake. Behind them, at least 10 riders followed, their pursuit relentless despite the worsening conditions. These were no common bandits like Cole and his gang. These were professional manhunters, likely former cavalry or scouts, men who wouldn't be easily shaken. "This way!" Eliza called, veering off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound up into the rocks. "Badger Pass, too narrow for them to ride abreast. They'll have to come through single file." Ezra followed her lead, recognizing the tactical advantage instantly. The pass would funnel their pursuers, forcing them to expose themselves one at a time, a perfect position for an ambush. They reached a switchback halfway up the pass and dismounted quickly, securing their horses behind an outcropping of rock. The driving rain had soaked them to the skin, but neither complained as they took up positions overlooking the trail below. "Remember," Ezra said quietly, "we just need to delay them. Don't take unnecessary risks." Eliza checked her shotgun, face set with grim determination. "Define unnecessary." Before he could respond, the first rider appeared at the mouth of the pass. Even through the curtain of rain, Ezra recognized the methodical approach of a man who had hunted human prey before. The rider dismounted, examining the ground briefly before signaling to those behind him. One by one, the pursuers entered the narrow defile, moving with the caution of experienced trackers. Ezra counted 8 men, professionals all, well-armed and likely well-paid for this particular hunt. The lead tracker paused at the first switchback, frowning as he studied the trail in the dim light. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his head and looked directly to where Ezra and Eliza were concealed. "I know you're up there, Graves," the man called, his voice carrying despite the storm. "This doesn't have to end badly. Just give us the ledger and you can ride away." Ezra remained silent, calculating angles and options. The man below, likely Laughlin's chief enforcer, was no fool. He wouldn't expose himself without purpose. "Senator Laughlin's a reasonable man," the tracker continued. "He's authorized me to offer you a deal. $10,000 and safe passage to Mexico. That's more than fair for a man in your position." Eliza shifted slightly, her eyes questioning. Ezra gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Engaging would only reveal their exact position. No takers. The tracker sighed theatrically. "Shame. Guess we do this the hard way." He raised his arm in a signal, and suddenly the night erupted in gunfire, not aimed at their position, but at the rocks all around the narrow pass, bullets ricocheting wildly off stone. Not trying to hit them, Ezra realized, trying to flush them out. A classic tactic against a concealed enemy, but two could play that game. With a quick gesture to Eliza, he took careful aim at a boulder perched precariously above the trail. 3 rapid shots, and the massive rock broke free, thundering down onto the path below. The pursuers scattered, cursing as they sought cover from the sudden rockslide. "Now!" Ezra hissed, and they both mounted quickly, using the confusion to break away up the steeper trail that led toward Devil's Backbone. The gambit bought them precious minutes as their pursuers recovered and remounted. By the time the trackers had navigated around the blockage, Ezra and Eliza had gained significant ground, pushing deeper into territory where horses would soon become a liability. "There's a place ahead," Eliza called over her shoulder as they rode. "Old Apache hideout. We can lose the horses and continue on foot through the rocks." "No way they'll track us in this storm," Ezra nodded, though doubt nagged at him. These weren't ordinary trackers. The man leading them had recognized Ezra's tactics immediately, had countered with his own. There was something familiar about his methods. The realization hit just as they reached a sheltered overhang where they could secure the horses. "Eliza," he said urgently, "the man leading them, I think it's Victor Garza." Her eyes widened in recognition of the name. "The Bloodhound? The one who tracked the Cortez gang through the Sonoran Desert?" "The same," Ezra confirmed grimly. "If it's him, we've got bigger problems than I thought. Garza doesn't just track, he predicts, thinks like his prey." "Then we don't think like prey," Eliza said firmly, dismounting and gathering her gear. "We think like predators." The simple shift in perspective was so perfectly aligned with the Phantom's own philosophy that Ezra couldn't help the smile that curved his lips despite their dire situation. "Exactly," he agreed. "We stop running and start hunting." Lightning flashed again as they secured the horses, illuminating Eliza's face, determined, unafraid, and somehow more alive than he'd ever seen her. In that moment, with danger closing in and rain soaking them to the bone, Ezra Stone finally admitted to himself what he'd known for years, but never allowed himself to acknowledge. He loved this woman with a depth that defied reason. "What's wrong?" she asked, catching his intense gaze. "Nothing," he replied softly. "Just realizing some truths are worth fighting for." She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then nodded once. "Then let's fight." She shouldered her pack, containing the false ledger that had already served its purpose. "And when this is over, we'll talk about those truths." Together, they disappeared into the storm-lashed rocks of Devil's Backbone, no longer fleeing, but preparing to turn the tables on the hunters who had unwittingly become the hunted. Behind them, Gaza and his men approached cautiously, unaware that they were now pursuing not a desperate fugitive, but the Phantom Rider himself, a legend born in blood and shadow who had returned for one final reckoning. 1 hour. That was all they needed to give Harker and the true ledger. 1 hour to ensure that justice, 8 years delayed, would finally be served. And if the cost was high, if the Phantom had to ride one last time into the darkness from which he was born, then so be it. But as Ezra moved silently through the storm, with Eliza at his side, he found himself hoping, for perhaps the first time in his violent life, that the legend might finally find peace. That Ezra Stone, bartender of Redemption Creek, might have a future beyond the shadows of his past. Only time and the coming confrontation would tell. Thunder crashed overhead as Ezra and Eliza reached Devil's Backbone, a jagged limestone ridge that carved through the eastern hills like the spine of some ancient beast. They'd managed to stay ahead of their pursuers, but the gap was closing. These men were professionals, undeterred by the worsening storm or treacherous terrain. "The caves!" Eliza shouted over the howling wind, pointing toward a dark opening barely visible in the rain-slicked rock face. "We can lose them inside." Ezra nodded, recognizing the strategic advantage. The complex labyrinth of caverns beneath Devil's Backbone was notorious. Men had entered and never returned, their bodies swallowed by the darkness. But Eliza moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its secrets. They dismounted quickly, sending their horses galloping away as a diversion before slipping into the narrow entrance. The sudden absence of rain and wind was disorienting, the cave's silence broken only by their labored breathing and water dripping from their soaked clothing. "This way," Eliza whispered, producing a small tin lantern from her pack and lighting it with practiced ease. The weak flame pushed back the darkness just enough to reveal a twisting passageway that descended deeper into the earth. "Watch your step. Ground gets treacherous after the first bend." Ezra followed closely, his senses heightened, cataloging every detail of their surroundings. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying an ancient mustiness layered with minerals and damp stone. Behind them faintly came the sounds of pursuit, voices echoing at the cave entrance. "They won't blindly follow," Ezra observed quietly. "Gaza's too smart for that. He'll post men at every exit he knows about, then send his best trackers in after us." "Good thing I know a few exits he doesn't," Eliza replied with grim satisfaction. "My father worked these caves when I was a girl. Silver mining operation. Failed financially but left behind maps only a handful of people have seen." They pressed deeper into the twisting passages, moving swiftly despite the difficult terrain. Twice they doubled back, taking side tunnels that seemed to lead nowhere but eventually connected to larger chambers. The strategy would confuse their Trail, buying precious minutes. How much time do you think Harker needs? Eliza asked as they paused in a cathedral-like cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness above the lantern's reach. By now, maybe another 15 minutes to reach Parker's escort, Ezra calculated, then perhaps an hour to secure the ledger and testimony. So we hide until morning, she concluded, scanning the chamber's multiple exits with a practiced eye. Then make our way to Fort Laramie. A distant echo of voices made them both tense, the sound distorted by the cave's strange acoustics. Impossible to tell how close the pursuers were, but the hunt had definitely moved underground. This way, Eliza decided, pointing toward the smallest of the passage openings. It gets tight, but opens up to a chamber with an underground spring. We can wait there. They had barely taken 3 steps when a flicker of light appeared in one of the larger tunnels. Instantly, Ezra extinguished their lantern, pulling Eliza into the shadows beside a massive column of stone. 3 men emerged cautiously into the chamber, their lanterns held high, rifles ready. At their lead was a lean, silver-haired figure, whose weathered face bore the scars of a lifetime spent in violent pursuit. Victor Garza, the infamous bloodhound, moved with the methodical precision of a predator who had cornered prey countless times before. "They're close," he announced to his companions, his voice carrying the faint accent of the borderlands. The woman's leading him through the northern passages, trying to circle back toward the western exit. He knelt, examining the ground with almost supernatural focus, fingers brushing over indentations invisible to ordinary eyes. "Looks like they're heading for Weaver's chamber," one of his men suggested, gesturing toward one of the larger tunnels. "That's what they want us to think," Garza replied, rising slowly. His gaze swept the cavern, pausing momentarily on the column where Ezra and Eliza hid. A cold smile touched his lips. "No, they're smarter than that." He turned, approaching their hiding place with deliberate steps. "Aren't you, Phantom?" The deadly calm in his voice confirmed what Ezra had suspected. Garza wasn't just tracking them. He was hunting the Phantom Rider personally, a professional challenge that transcended his employer's orders. "When you emerged from hiding," Garza continued, moving closer, "I almost didn't believe it was really you, the legendary ghost, pouring drinks in a backwater saloon. But your reputation was never exaggerated, was it? Your speed with those Colts today. Impressive, even after all these years." Ezra's hand found Eliza's in the darkness, squeezing once. A silent signal. They had one chance, and timing would be everything. "But legends end, Phantom," Garza was saying, now just feet from their position. "And yours ends in these caves, forgotten, and—" Ezra moved with explosive suddenness, shoving their concealing column with all his strength. The massive stalagmite, weakened by years of water damage, toppled with a thunderous crash directly toward Garza and his men. They scattered, cursing, as tons of limestone crashed down, sending choking dust billowing through the chamber. "Run!" Ezra urged, pulling Eliza toward the narrow passage she'd indicated earlier. Behind them, confusion reigned as Garza's men struggled to regroup in the dust and darkness. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing them to proceed single file, then to crawl as the ceiling descended. Cold water soaked through their clothing as they inched forward, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. After what felt like eternity, the tunnel widened again, opening into a small chamber where an underground spring bubbled from the rock wall, filling a crystalline pool before disappearing again into the earth. Slivers of grey light filtered down from fissures in the ceiling far above, enough to navigate by without their lantern. "We should be safe here," Eliza whispered, sinking. Down against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "That collapse will block the main passage for hours." Ezra nodded, though his vigilance never wavered. "Garza will find another way. Men like him always do. Then we'll be gone before he does." She brushed wet hair from her face, studying him. In the dim light, You know him personally, don't you? There's history there. Cinco Lomas, Ezra confirmed after a moment's hesitation. Small border town. I was tracking a fugitive, murderer who'd escaped custody during transfer. Garza was hunting the same man but for the bounty. His expression hardened at the memory. I got there first, took the man alive. Garza arrived as I was preparing to transport him back to territorial custody. He wanted the bounty, Eliza guessed. He wanted the kill, Ezra corrected. Tried to shoot the prisoner right there on the street. I stopped him. He absently touched a scar on his left shoulder, visible beneath his torn shirt. Nearly didn't, though. The implications hung between them. Victor Garza, the bloodhound, had a personal score to settle with the Phantom Rider, one that transcended professional rivalry. How long should we wait? Eliza asked after a moment of silence. Till daybreak, Ezra decided. By then, Harker will have reached Parker. The ledger will be secure. He checked his Colts, ensuring they'd stayed dry during their escape. Then we make for the western exit, circle around to Fort Laramie. Eliza nodded, though doubt flickered across her face. And if Garza's waiting for us? Ezra's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a cold certainty that belonged to the Phantom, not the bartender. Then I finish what started at Cinco Lomas. They lapsed into silence, the only sound, the gentle burbling of the underground spring. Despite the danger, despite the chill of their wet clothing and the hard stone beneath them, there was an unexpected intimacy in their shared refuge. Two people thrown together by circumstance, yet bound by something deeper than mere survival. When this is over, Eliza said finally, her voice soft in the darkness. What then? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither. A dared voice during 8 years of casual friendship. Ezra considered his answer carefully, aware that for the first time in decades, he was contemplating a future beyond the next gunfight. I meant what I said, he replied. The Phantom Rider dies with Laughlin's conspiracy. After that, his gaze met hers in the dim light. Redemption Creek still needs a bartender. A small smile touched her lips. Just a bartender. To start with, he conceded, the ghost of an answering smile warming his features. Though I reckon a man with my particular history might need some guidance finding his way in more peaceful pursuits. I might know someone willing to provide that guidance, she replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. For the right candidate. The moment stretched between them, a fragile promise neither was quite ready to name, but both were unwilling to relinquish. Then from somewhere in the darkness of the surrounding tunnels came the faint but unmistakable sound of displaced stone. They weren't alone. Ezra was on his feet instantly, Colts drawn, positioning himself between Eliza and the chamber's main entrance. How many ways into this room? He whispered. 2, she replied, rising beside him with her shotgun ready. The way we came, and that narrow fissure on the far wall, leads up toward the ridge. The sound came again, closer now, not the clatter of loose stones under careless feet, but the deliberate testing of weight on unstable ground. Someone was moving with extreme caution, aware that sound carried in these caverns. Go, Ezra urged, nodding toward the fissure. Get to Fort Laramie, find Harker and Parker. Not without you, she replied, firm and unyielding. Before he could argue, a voice called from the darkness of the tunnel, not Garza's border-inflected tones, but something more refined, more political. Nathaniel Graves, the voice echoed in the chamber. I believe we have mutual acquaintances to discuss. Ezra's blood ran cold at the familiar cadence, the practiced authority that had once governed territorial justice with a corrupt hand. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Hollister, he breathed, the name barely audible. But Eliza heard, her eyes widening in shock. That's not possible. You said you killed him. "I thought I did," Ezra replied, his mind racing to reconcile what he knew with what he was hearing. "Shot him twice at point-blank range." The voice came again, closer now. "Death has a way of being exaggerated in our line of work, doesn't it, Phantom? Rather like your own disappearance." A figure emerged from the tunnel entrance, lantern held. To reveal a face Ezra had last seen contorted in death, older now, one side heavily scarred from a bullet's path, but unmistakably Judge William Hollister. The architect of Diablo Canyon, the mastermind Ezra had spent 8 years gathering evidence against, stood before them very much alive. And in that moment, as his past literally rose from the grave to confront him, Ezra Stone knew that the Phantom Ryder would have to ride one last time before finding peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.